I'd like to talk to you today about what might be one of the biggest climate stories facing Canada and British Columbia in 2024, a project that so far at least few in our country have heard of. It's the next big LNG project and it's called Ksi Lisims LNG. Here's the basics. The lead proponent of this project for the latest liquefied natural gas terminal is the Nisga'a Nation. The less prominent partners are Alberta-based Rockies LNG, which is a consortium of oil and gas companies, and Texas-based Western LNG, both of which have been busily lobbying the BC government. The proposed LNG terminal would be on a floating platform at the mouth of the Nass River, bordering the Alaska Panhandle. The facility aims to produce 12 million tons of liquefied natural gas a year. A major new pipeline would be needed to carry the fracked methane gas from northeastern BC to the terminal, where it would then be liquefied and loaded onto tankers for shipment to Asia. The project proponents like to contend that Ksi Lisims will have low greenhouse gas emissions. It will be net zero by 2030. It will be fully electrified, meaning the vast energy needed to supercool the gas in order to liquefy it will come from BC Hydro's electricity grid rather than from the burning of gas, which is what happens in most LNG facilities. But the contention that upstream and transportation emissions are well mitigated is simply not credible, given what we now know about methane leakages from the fracked gas extraction to methane off-gassing during loading and shipping and unloading. The project would lock in place a huge expansion of fracking in BC's Northeast and place the province's climate targets out of reach. The combined extraction and processing emissions would likely lock in about 3 megatons a year. So much of that net zero goal will inevitably rely on the purchase of dubious offsets. The project is going to require the construction of yet another new gas pipeline, TC Energy's Prince Rupert Gas Transmission Project, roughly the same size as the Coastal GasLink pipeline and built by the very same company that has violated the consent of Wet'suwet'en hereditary leaders. And the hydroelectric power needed to power Ksi Lisims would be equivalent to all of the power produced by the soon-to-be completed Site C Dam, meaning after all the public cost of building the Site C Dam, which is about $16 billion by last count, and all the ecological disruption and the opposition from Indigenous nations in the Site C area, none of its new power will be available to electrify and decarbonize our homes and our vehicles. But let me take a step back and explain the biggest reason why Ksi Lisims would be a carbon bomb. Most importantly, these net zero claims made by the proponents ignore the greenhouse gases that would be emitted when LNG produced by Ksi Lisims reaches its destination and is burned. Conveniently for BC and the federal government and the Ksi Lisims proponents, under global greenhouse gas accounting conventions, these Scope 3 or downstream emissions, they don't count towards BC's carbon pollution. Once the LNG produced by this facility is shipped overseas and burned somewhere else, its greenhouse gas emissions count towards the emissions of the destination country. But let us be clear. The global atmosphere we all share doesn't give a flying fart about such accounting rules or man-made lines on a map. In an era when the United Nations and the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and the International Agency are all sounding the alarm that the world cannot abide new fossil fuel infrastructure, to ignore Scope 3 emissions and proceed with a project of this size is an abdication of BC and Canada's international and moral and climate obligations. Ksi Lisims LNG project aims to produce 12 megatons a year of liquefied gas, meaning that the terminal would produce almost as much liquefied natural gas as Shell's giant LNG Canada Phase 1 facility in Kitimat. 12 megatons of LNG is burned, it produces about 32 megatons of greenhouse gas emissions. 32 megatons is equivalent to more than half of British Columbia's total annual emissions. Now think about that. Currently, British Columbia's climate plan commits the province to lower its greenhouse gas emissions by 40% by 2030. So if this project goes ahead, literally everything the province accomplishes to reduce carbon pollution will be undone in global climate terms by this single project. LNG proponents' most preferred argument is that LNG shipped to Asia will displace coal-generated electricity there. So we'd somehow be doing the world a climate favor, given that burning coal, so the claim goes, produces more greenhouse gas emissions than burning gas. But this is simply wishful thinking on the part of LNG's apologists. In truth, we do not know what LNG shipped from here will displace overseas. It could displace the speedier implementation of renewables. It could displace nuclear power, which don't emit greenhouse gases. And even if it did displace coal, there's a growing body of research that when the full life cycle emissions of LNG are captured, particularly all that leaked methane from the fracking and the transportation of the gas, that the GHG profile of LNG is at best equivalent and sometimes dramatically worse than coal. So the days of seeing LNG and gas as a transition fuel are long past. If gas was ever a bridge fuel, it was a bridge to the present. We have run out the clock. We now need to leap right to renewables, the cheapest and cleanest alternatives already at hand. Then there's a matter of contested Indigenous consent. As it becomes harder for fossil fuel projects to gain approval, the industry is getting smarter. And Ksi Lisims is part of a larger recent trend of oil and gas companies formally partnering with Indigenous nations in order to pitch their projects as economic reconciliation. I respect the need of the Nisga'a Nation to secure new forms of employment and economic development, but the Ksi Lisims LNG project cannot be the answer. Its harm to the climate far surpasses the benefits. Economic hardship makes the appeal of such projects understandable, but in the context of poverty and unemployment, the degree to which consent is genuinely freely given is very much an open question. The project does not have the consent of nearby nations. Most significantly, the neighboring Ksi Lisims Nation, whose territory encompasses the mouth of the Nass River, is strongly opposed. And in a statement released last November, the nation emphasized that neither the Ksi Lisims Council nor the 9 allied tribes have approved or consented to the project. The LNG tankers for this project are going to pass through Ksi Lisims territory. Last month, the Gitineau hereditary chiefs also raised concerns about the project, noting that the floating LNG terminal in the Nass River estuary would negatively impact juvenile salmon upon which they rely. And they have also flagged that the pipeline needed to carry the gas to the proposed LNG facility has the potential to cross over 50 kilometers of their territory, and they have also expressed concerns about the climate impacts of the project. The Ksi Lisims proposal highlights that a significant but unquantified number of permanent jobs would be created for local Indigenous people on the site of the proposed project. And those jobs are needed, but there are alternatives. The BC government could be making a counteroffer that speaks to both the economic and employment needs of the local nation and the climate imperative that we all confront. Here's an idea. There are thousands of marine vessels all along the coast that urgently need to be converted to electric marine battery systems. The province could partner with the Nisga'a Nation and provide just that service on the floating platform proposed for this LNG facility. Hundreds of people could be trained and locally employed. That's just one example. There is so much work to be done as we transform our society off fossil fuels and make our communities and natural ecosystems more resilient to extreme weather. It starts, though, with vision and a political will to offer a different path and a determination to offer public investments and genuine partnerships that represent a more hopeful offer than the pitches coming from the oil and gas companies. If this project proceeds, decades from now, it will stand as one of the most significant legacies of the BC government, but it won't be one with which anyone in today's government will want to be associated, nor one that they will care to explain to their grandchildren. All told, we simply cannot allow a carbon bomb of such proportions to proceed. Far better, we should invest in jobs and industries that will build a resilient economy for the long term.